Welcome to Pacific Northwest Mike Check, where Mike Connolly, owner of Windermere Real Estate Central Inc. in Kirkland, shares his lifetime of experiences as a successful businessman, real estate broker, and Pacific Northwest enthusiast. Throughout this podcast, Mike will be interviewing passionate experts in the industry who will give you a new perspective on the world of real estate, business, and life.
Hello, and welcome to our second episode of Pacific Northwest Mike Check. My name is Sophia. I'm the moderator of this podcast, and I'm joined today by Mike and a very special guest.
Thanks so much, Tom, for taking a few minutes to be with us today. Tom Hurdelbrink is the Chief Executive Officer and President of Northwest Multiple Listing Service. And one of the reasons I was excited to have you on board is you are kind of the hidden secret behind our Northwest MLS and all that goes on there. And this podcast reaches out to a lot of the real estate community. And I just wanted them to know you and a little more about you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate being here.
So first question, Tom, is, and you and I chatted a lot about this over the course of time. I've had the privilege of traveling with you and sat in meetings and conferences with you over the course of years. But you've been part of the Association of Realtors back in the day. Is that where your real estate career somewhat began?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, this is going back a few decades. I left college, didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, spent time in a motorhome factory, a drugstore, fishing, drinking a lot of beer, and then ran into a buddy of mine from high school, a fellow athlete I was on a number of sports teams with, and his dad worked for the National Association of Realtors in Chicago. And I went there and visited, met a few people, eventually got hired to be a legislative analyst for state and municipal legislative issues, things like rent control, condominium conversion restriction laws, land use issues, water rights. And so I did that for a few years, and that got me introduced to two things. One, real estate in a very sort of deep way. And then two, the trade association business. So there are many realtor associations around the country, probably over 1,000 local realtor associations, plus every state association, and of course the National Association where I was working at the headquarters. And that fellow who became my mentor suggested that I could either go down the road of being a lobbyist, or I could go down the road of using my business background and business degree and pursue managing a local realtor association. So I got involved with Lorain County Association of Realtors in Ohio, outside of Cleveland, where I actually was born. And I was one of the three youngest executives in the country. I was 24 when I was hired. So no age discrimination there. And very lucky to get that kind of exposure in an early stage for a number of years. I also left the industry for a few years, sold securities, stocks and bonds for Merrill Lynch. So I know what it's like to live on commission, not have a salary. I understand the situation where your income starts at zero at the first day of every month. You got to track the X's and O's. So eventually I got back into the trade association side when the multiple listing system in the Cleveland area expanded into a 5-county regional. And I knew once I was exposed to the realtor associations that is something I wanted to do. I liked the technology exposure. I liked the business side of the trade association work. And the brokers and the firm operators were more interested in the MLS than most of the other activities at the Realtor Association. So I followed that along. After a number of years, I ran a regional MLS in Cleveland for 11 years. Then I went to work for Realtor.com in California as they were getting formed. Stayed there a few years. They had some troubles. I ended up going to the California Association of Realtors and ran their for-profit in-state business for California, which got me exposed to developing all the real estate forms for the statewide system, which Northwest MLS does here. We are the proprietors of statewide standard real estate forms. Then in California, the other thing I learned was managing and overseeing the local, they called them realtor stores. So a little store where you would buy your signs and sign writers and the booties for your shoes when you're showing houses. In California, at the state association level, we were the wholesaler of product to over 150 local realtor associations. It was a multi-million-dollar business. The forms business was multi-million, worked with lots of attorneys and brokers from across the state to manage those operations. So when I came to Northwest MLS in 2007, I had been exposed to almost everything Northwest MLS does in some capacity in different parts of my career, and it just felt like the right place to be.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground, and somewhere along the way you caught up with Jack Johnson, who preceded you. Was that in California?
So Jack and I met when I was in Ohio managing the Northern Ohio Regional MLS. And even though we were owned by a handful of realtor associations in our operation then, Northwest MLS was owned by approximately 2,000 broker firms. But my board of directors was always broker owners of firms. So we had a lot in common about our leadership and our dynamics in our business models. And so I met Jack in 1989. And then by the time he was ready to retire, he reached out to me and I reached out to him because it's a business model that is very sort of broker firm centric in its our overarching strategy, but then delivering services to all the brokers or agents licensed with the firms as best as they can. So there's only about 20 MLSs in the whole country that are owned by the brokerage firms themselves. The rest, about 550 or so, are owned by local realtor associations, and so their agendas may have differences in how they approach the MLS service.
Wow. So you've done a lot so far, but can you talk a little bit about what the MLS is for someone that might not know exactly
Sure.
what that is?
Yeah, we get caught up in that all the time. It is not Major League Soccer. The multiple listing service, I'll try to keep this somewhat brief. Multiple listing services, as we know them in real estate, are a facility or an entity that helps facilitate cooperation between the listing broker, the broker who takes a listing for sale, and the selling broker or the broker representing the buyer. So as a trade association or actually a business cooperative, you are bringing together competitors in the same industry, yet trying to facilitate a smooth transaction. Very similar to how broker dealers work on the stock exchange, exchanging transactions between buyers and sellers of securities. The difference here is our security or our asset is a real estate parcel. So that's what, and the term multiple listing comes about. Really, it goes back to before the Civil War in Cincinnati and Baltimore. There are records that show that there were multiple listing exchanges for real estate sales. And brokers back then who were licensed by their state would meet once a week and share the sheet of paper that described the property they were representing with everyone else who came to the meeting. And then they would swap information about buyers for that property and then move on to the next person and talk about their parcel. Very similar to like a cattle exchange or a cattle auction, or any way you're trading an asset. The difference is we work to help facilitate the transaction for the brokerage firms for the benefit of the buying and selling public. So it's very, we try to make it as transparent and fluid as we can. I hope that helps explain what MLSs are to people. It's just a term of art that stuck around forever. The industry tried to trademark MLS years ago. We were not able to because Canada actually trademarked MLS as a Canadian trademark, and the U.S. agreed to partner with the Canadian Real Estate Association to not challenge that, and that way we partnered in money to buy the domain name. So in Canada, it's preserved. No one in America can buy the name MLS or trademark MLS and compete in the real estate space for the term MLS. That's probably more than you wanted to know. But
a lot of history there.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it went that far back into the 1800s. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy. So so our podcast is Pacific Northwest Mike Check, which, entails all the areas in the Pacific Northwest that we love. Where exactly does the Northwest MLS serve?
So Northwest MLS was an outgrowth of a number of less than a handful of broker-owned MLSs in the greater Seattle area that merged in the 80s, 1984. And since then, over 20 different MLSs have merged into or been consolidated with Northwest MLS. So we cover virtually from the Pacific Ocean in the state of Washington all the way past Moses Lake in central Washington, from the Canadian border down to Oregon. We really today only take listings that are in the state of Washington, but someday that may change. So we cover officially over 20, I think it's 23 or 24 counties, where every brokerage firm in that county is a member of Northwest MLS. We're probably one of the top 15 MLSs in the country in terms of member count. We have over 30,000 licensed brokers using our service. We also, in the forms business, deliver service to non-Northwest MLS members by facilitating the use of our forms for 4,000 realtors across Washington State who are not in Northwest MLS. So we have 30,000 out of roughly 35 to 38,000 people in the whole state. So it's not quite statewide, but we're one of the biggest in the country.
Yeah, and expanding here and there occasionally, right?
Occasionally, little drips and drabs. Yeah.
Yeah. So question for you. You referenced earlier the difference between a member-owned multiple and an association-owned and run multiple. Could you give you've lived in both those worlds. Could you give a feeling for the dynamics that goes on between one versus the other?
So there is a dynamic, and some people might think it's significant. Some might think it's slight. The difference, first of all, I'll clarify Northwest MLS's operation in some respect. We have a board of directors that I report to, and most of those directors are elected from all the other member firms from their different territories. So we have territories, you get nominated and elected. We have a position where there are brokers that can be appointed if the size of those brands or firms exceeds 10% of the entire market. So today we have two brands that qualify. Windermere is one, and Keller Williams is the other. In the past, at one time, John L. Scott was also one of those 10% plus operations, and so was Coldwell Banker Bain. But, market dynamics change. So we only have designated brokers or owners or officers of a firm that can sit on our board. Branch office manager would qualify. In most of the Realtor Association MLSs, you could also be an agent or a licensed broker in a firm, but not managing a firm and be on their board. So that's one distinction in leadership. And so that does cause the agenda to be a little different in their environments. At one time, I would say maybe 8 to 10 years ago, there was some discussion that Northwest MLS was too firm focused, too centric on helping the firms. And so we've done some things to make sure we're reaching out to the other brokers, all the licensed brokers, in terms of helping us review products, helping us review our current systems, giving us input on some of our procedures and forms and so on like that. So there's a little bit of give and take. But the other thing that's unique about Northwest MLS is, since we're owned by the firms, we are very focused in the industry and their practice. At the Realtor associations, there's a lot more energy in political issues of the day, probably a lot more committees, because they want to grow all of the people to have an opportunity to serve, or to get a ribbon to be on the team, or whatever the process is. And I don't want to downplay that, because there's a role for that. It's just that Northwest MLS lives in a world where we're much more focused, a lot more streamlined, and because of that, we get very talented people on our board. It is not necessarily a popularity contest, because almost everybody that runs is already incredibly well qualified. Hopefully that helps.
That helps a great deal. That helps a great deal.
Yeah. So for most real estate brokers, the Northwest MLS is a utility. They turn on and off throughout the day. They're using it, but it's so much more than that. And there's a lot of work that goes into it, and teams of people that run the Northwest MLS. So can you talk about a little bit of the day-to-day at the Northwest MLS and what that looks like?
Well, today we're all sitting at home. But we are working, and so that's interesting too. In the pandemic here, we had developed a business continuity plan and a disaster recovery plan back in the, I'd say, 2012, 13, 14 time period. So we were prepared when this happened, and we were able to deploy all of our employees to work from home. So obviously, we all have had to learn to scramble about that. But what's interesting is, and I had a similar feeling about this when I got to know Mike. You mentioned Jack Johnson years ago, really the spearhead of creating Northwest MLS. And I remember talking to Jack a number of times about this, that Northwest MLS has an accumulation of tons of real estate data, all the listings, all the off-market properties. We've had for 15 years, all the public records for the entire state of Washington. So the assets and the resources available to our members and brokers is tremendously rich. But you can get that data. So what makes Northwest MLS different? Northwest MLS has people and processes that help facilitate the rules of the road, how brokers are supposed to fairly cooperate with each other, follow the rules and regulations. And since we have a number of systems with all this data, and it's constantly getting updated or changing, or you're seeing evolutions of new versions of software, or we're adding new products and services, it is the service that makes us different. So when we look at other MLSs or proposals for services from other vendors, they offer us really nice pricing. But what most people forget is the education and the training and the follow-on customer service. So we have a dedicated call center of about a dozen people that take phone calls and emails all day. We also have a roll-up to a half a dozen, I think it's 5 technical support people that are very technically trained. It takes longer to train those people and for them to get that role. We have our own dedicated technology teams, of course, and then we have trainers. We have 5 full-time live trainers. Now, they used to be on the road a lot. Today, they're doing one-on-one meetings or quick checks with an office. You want an office meeting on Tuesday morning. You want 15 minutes on a transaction desk feature, we'll do that. You want an hour deep dive on a product with our trainers, we'll do that. Clock hour training for 3.5 hours, we do it for all of our systems. And so in terms of customer service and support, 70% of our employees, that's what they do. And we've been very fortunate in working with our board of directors and the members who are involved to know that customer service, when a broker is out trying to get a transaction done or get the listing or they're ready to make the offer and they have questions and they call us, they want an answer right now. And so we answer these phones live. We handle over 200,000 phone calls a year from our members, supporting them, and equally, if not more, emails. And so somebody actually has to facilitate it. So it's a bit of old school, sort of no tech, low tech with people and processes tied together with our technology. So that's what makes us different. And that's, I think, what makes us special.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the service is exceptional. And I've called a few times into the call centers, and when it's been overpowered here locally, I'll get somebody in Wenatchee or I'll get somebody in Vancouver. I love the seamless transition. It's a great job.
I'm glad you brought that up, because those people are remote from what we would have called our headquarter office in Kirkland. And our phone systems and our technology allow us, when we get impacted, like when there's dues billing cycles or a big system change or new forms that come out, we are able to, we call it call center backup. So the normal 10 to 12 people that are on the phone, we toggle some switches, and that opens up access to other people, including our trainers, some of our technical people. And then we operate 19 to 20 satellite offices across the state. I mentioned earlier how we've been able to grow and accumulate other listing services. And when we've done that, we have never, we don't go in and napalm a building or a village. We know it is the local people that are important for those brokers in those markets. So we facilitate these offices. They probably run break even, but they're service centers for training. People can go in and get a new key box or get their key box key service address. There's a lot of things we can do that are local that make those people feel connected to Northwest MLS.
Yeah, very smart.
So speaking of day-to-day, is there something that you do on your day-to-day to achieve success?
So I, years ago, used to spend time, because real estate is so heavily involved in sales. And I had a chairman of my realtor board in Ohio, Lorain County Realtors, who used to say every day he would try to do something to be educated, motivated, or inspired. And so I do that a little bit. I'm probably not as focused as I should. I stay physically active, just in terms of staying in shape and being smart about my body. I've tried golf. Mike's seen me. I can have three great golf holes in a row, and then you don't want to look at the rest of the scorecard ever. So I don't have a singular focus, but I think I have just been enjoyed so much the fact that the MLS is contributing to the success of the firms. The firms are helping move 15% of the gross domestic product in the United States. I mean, that's a big thing to be involved with. Housing and home ownership is so critical to stability of families, stability of communities. So it's even on a bad day, I kind of walk away thinking, maybe this wasn't my best day, but I'm still plugging along, trying to make things as good as I can. I had other hobbies and different things at times. I've played music, I've played sports, but as you get older, not that I'm aging that rapidly, but the knees don't work like they used to. So softball leagues and things like that, I'm not involved in anymore.
Well, I'd really hope that when she asks you if you do something daily to achieve success, that maybe occasionally you call Mike just for that inspiration. but that's okay.
I actually have called Mike at times when I do need some advice. He's a pretty good source.
Yeah, well, now you have a podcast to listen to as well. So
yeah, there you go. And I think that number that you referenced, I read the other day, a National Association of Realtors statistic, that every house sale generates something around $65,000 of revenue into the state. It's a huge number.
Huge number.
Yeah. So Northwest MLS is hugely respected within the multiple listing service community in the country. You're asked to speak at conferences, moderate panels. What does it take to keep up that level of leadership? I mean, you're connecting all the time, are you not? How do you stay in touch with those guys and make it not just good, but exceptional?
So I think because not only was Jack Johnson very good at one-on-one conversations and sought out leadership, I've learned a lot from mentors of mine and people ahead of me. One of the things that's great about Northwest MLS is our committees and our board draws from such well-informed and practiced real estate brokers. So I don't have to be an expert in real estate transactions because I'm in a room full of people who are expert about that. What I did sort of mid-career for me was decide to become a certified association executive. So I went to a program. I had to read about 20 some textbooks over the span of 2 years and then go to some testing, got a designation. There's only a couple thousand of us in the country. And I wanted to be an expert at managing an association or a cooperative of business operators. And one of the things I learned in that process was you try to seek out the best wherever you are. And so we have used some consultants at Northwest MLS that help our senior staff. I got to tell you, my staff is extraordinary. Monica Beck is our COO. Monica has been with the company a few decades now. Started very young. She's done almost every job in the company except probably plug the phone jack into the wall. I have a general counsel in-house, Justin Haig, been with us a number of years. Bright guy, was doing real estate forms and real estate work before he came to us when he worked at an outside law firm. One of our head of training and communications, Tara, education degree, trained for 5 years here. Magna cum laude. I know she went to Wazoo, Mike, so that might not be as exciting for you. But
I still like her.
Yeah, we still like her, and she can read and write, and and then our tech team. We had a tech leader change a couple of years ago, and Kevin McCroskey runs the IT team, and we continue to bring in people that are strong. I have never been afraid to hire people that are smarter than me. Yeah. Many of my peers, on the other hand, are reluctant to do that. Sure, it makes me uncomfortable at times. You know, could I put myself at risk? On the other hand, they all raise the boats in the water when you do that. And so I've been the beneficiary of surrounding myself with great people. It's probably why I don't have to be as visible as maybe some other CEOs of MLSs in the country, because I'm fine having other people share some of the limelight and the successes that we do. And I am a trained administrator. I believe I did a personality assessment a number of years ago, and one of the things I learned was that I'm a great arranger. And people that are great arrangers end up being conductors of large orchestras. And so I tried to create a model in my mind of how I could do that. So I don't have to be in the brass section as the single best brass player or the best percussionist, but I know what they do. And I've done almost every one of those jobs. So I have a level of confidence and comfort that not only am I good at what I do and I'm happy to do what I do, but I also know that if something were to happen to me, the ship's going to continue to sail and we're going to go the right direction. And I think that's a hard spot to get to in terms of leadership and understanding that it's okay to let go and to delegate and let somebody else fail, because chances are I could fail just as well or better than them. But it's been quite a journey. So thanks for asking about that. I'm probably rambling on too much about that as well, but it's an interesting subject. Leadership I also had a mentor who was a broker of a large top 20 firm in America from Ohio, who I talked to him one time, younger, I was probably in my 30s, and I said, should I pursue more technology in my education or more schooling like an MBA or leadership? And he goes, Tom, hire the techies, be the leader. So I was like, okay, I'll do that.
You did well at that. And so having achieved all that success, I mean, and you have, what would this Tom tell the young Tom just starting out? What would be that word of wisdom you would tell young Tom?
So I learned this from my dad. Uh, Always be willing to be humble. Um, Accept that you're not the fastest gun in the room. You're not always going to be the smartest guy in the room, but be willing to work harder than the next guy in the room. My dad used to say, if you're a taxi driver, those days are probably going away as well, thanks to Uber and Lyft, but the way you get ahead is on your way home, you take one more fare. You always take one more fare home than the next guy. So I've always been willing to work more hours than most people. And what happens over time is some people will pay attention, but you'll also become more confident in yourself over time because you will actually be exposed to more knowledge. And then how do you apply that? Uh, it's tough because everybody wants to be at the top. You know, what's the old saying? It took 20 years to be an overnight success. And I think that's the reality is people just have to grind through their process. But eventually, like I was lucky in my 30s to decide where I wanted to go. Some people know when they're 20. I have a daughter who knew when she was 12 she was going to be a teacher. Boom. I'm like, how does somebody come up with that? I didn't know. And I think, but once you make a choice, move in that direction as hard as you can. And by the way, it's okay if you're wrong. Maybe it isn't your thing. When I was a stockbroker at Merrill Lynch, I thought the whole world was Merrill Lynch, and if I was going to fail, my world would end. Well, I also met the most successful stockbroker in Merrill Lynch in America at one time, and he said, "Hey, Tommy, guess what? There's life after Merrill Lynch. I trained with 10 guys, 9 are gone. I'm the only one left. The rest of them, one owns a McDonald's, one's a doctor, one's a lawyer. Yeah, you'll find something and be successful." I thought, okay.
And look, he was right.
Yeah, so I went to MLS.
Yes.
That's great. Well, you oversee a lot of different brokerage models and different industry cultures. What are some of the challenges of meeting everyone's needs? And how do you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, so thanks, Sophia. Nice question. It is challenging at times to be, you create relationships with your members and your firm operators and sort of get accustomed to their business models or what they're doing, and new models come along. It's like everything changes, right? And so you just have to be able to pause, step back and take a second, evaluate what the business model is. Does it fall within the guidelines of what we're chartered to do, which is facilitate brokerage transactions amongst member firms? So if a firm can qualify under Washington law to be licensed as a brokerage company, they have the right to join Northwest MLS. And licensing models or firm operating models can be varied and still fall within the guidelines of what the Department of Licensing in Washington State says you need to do in order to be a brokerage firm. So there's not a lot we can do other than to make available our services to them. Some people take advantage of a lot of our services. Some people don't want to take advantage of that many of our services, and that's fine. One of the things I've also learned over time is the difference between delivering or being and treating people equally versus equitably. Mm. So you can't always treat everything and everybody equally because their role or their relationship is not the same. But you have to give them equitable representation and respect. And I think that's how we're able to do it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And you do it that way. You do it that way. A lot of sections of our industry are focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and taking a hard look at improving themselves and going beyond the boundaries of what they know right now. Is Northwest MLS looking hard at that?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. This whole era of not just the pandemic, we're all at home, but social media has allowed all of us to be able to see with visibility more things in our lives and things that we might not have ever seen before. So, ironically or coincidentally, last year in 2019, Northwest MLS conducted an internal strategic planning discussion and process, and we came up with 5 critical initiatives that we should be addressing over the next couple of years. One of the 5 had to do with our governance of Northwest MLS. We haven't looked at our governance model, the structure of our board of directors, the number of districts we have in the state, the election process, who qualifies to serve, how many should we have, let alone what kind of diversity are we seeking, physical location, business model, ethnicity or race differential, and cultural. So Northwest MLS, very similar to other, I guess, long-term organizations in the Pacific Northwest for sure, is predominantly operated by white men. However, over the last, I'd say, dozen or 15 years, we've been a lot more focused on trying to get more women nominated onto the slate to get elected to the board of directors. Last year, we had our first African American serve on our board. He's still on the board. So we chose in that strat planning discussion that we would, one of the elements of our governance structure includes the idea of growing and reaching out for seeking more diversity within our committee and our board of director structure. So, and then lo and behold, we come into the current socially aware era that we're in today, and understanding diversity, inclusion, and issues around race and discrimination. So we literally are now, our staff just is going through, actually last week and this week, diversity, equity, and inclusion training program with an outside consultant who's facilitating 6 hours of training, 2 different 3-hour sessions over some time-based learning. So all of our employees will have been exposed to becoming more aware and informed and knowledgeable about issues regarding diversity. We want to introduce this to our board of directors and committees as well. We're partnering with Washington Realtors and the Commercial Brokers Association on this, as well as the regional MLS from the Portland, Oregon area and their leadership. So this has all evolved over the course of this summer. And while this may feel a little bit to some people as though it's reactionary, I believe that it's not. I think it's an awakening. You know, the term woke is a term that makes me think about what's happening now. And I, in my career, have worked, factory jobs, retail jobs, administrative jobs, been exposed to lots of people, lived in different parts of the country. But I know other people have not maybe had the same broad experiences as me and be as warm or welcoming or open to people. But if you read one book in the real estate industry, and just one book, I'm going to recommend a book. It's called The Color of Law. And if you get a chance, take a look at it or scan a summary on Amazon or something. It is frightening when you think about the fact that we have 3 constitutional amendments that speak to equality for race and their rights. And yet, even since those were passed, for decades, organized real estate in terms of the federal government, funding, financing, fair housing, all those rules continue to be broken for decades and decades. So we have in real estate a long way to go to sort of repair the reputation the industry has. But I think it can be repaired. But it's hundreds of years in the making, and it's going to take a long time to get real estate practices, building practices, lending practices, title and escrow, mortgage lending to you can't say I don't see color, because we all see color. We just have to recognize that everybody should have equal opportunity and access. So the term DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, one term that's missing there is access. And by making sure there's access to those opportunities, I think we will come a long way in real estate to do what we can in the real estate community to address things that are important to us about community and equitability.
Tip of the hat to you for being proactive there. We're taking actions at Windermere Real Estate as well, and we've hired a company called Moving Beyond to guide us down that path, and kind of with a philosophy of making progress, move slow, but do no harm along the way. And we know we're going to make mistakes, but so last question. When I was working closely with you and I was on the board of directors, we've talked about it occasionally, heard a lot in conferences, but many people say, hey, there's just a lot of multiple listing services in the country. You mentioned 700, 800, 900 multiples out there. Some member run, not that many, most association run. If you could wave a magic wand, what would that look like 20 years from now?
Mike, I will be riding off into the sunset when that happens. Maybe in Colville or wherever you came from. I think, more seriously though, MLSs have not regionalized as much as I think people thought they would. First of all, I think there's some stages we could go through. I do think statewide MLSs make a lot of sense because data is fairly common and consistent now with real estate. So data is fairly simple. But real estate is still licensed separately in all 50 states and the U.S. territories. So you have to sort of think about the Department of Licensing in those states. What does it take to get licensed? What are the rules and regulations for licensure, the practice of real estate, and how does that impact consumers? I think what would be cool to see is if there could be an agreement on a centralized database source for all the real estate. We either all pay in or share a cost or something. But I think you could still have service centers like Washington State or the Northwest, which would be Washington, Oregon, Idaho. And maybe there's going to be data centers, which that makes sense too, because you just want replication in order to make sure the data is secure. But really, I think about the challenges where you see the large portals like a Zillow, the Trulia, the Realtor.com. They've been able to aggregate data from all across the country. But the brands and the franchises have been slow. There's a couple of national real estate firms that have aggregated data, and when you have all that data in one place, you can do so much more, and you don't have to worry about the data. You're now managing the servicing of that information to your client. And I would love to see the MLS industry take some big strides in the next few years to try to consolidate or aggregate all the data together in one spot.
Yeah.
And that scares the bejesus out of some people because they think they're going to lose their own job or lose control. And that's probably a reality. But I think for the betterment of the industry and to serve consumers better, it's time to really move that forward. That's my thinking. But I hope it doesn't take 20 years either.
The wheels move slowly sometimes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, this leads us to our signature question. So we have two questions that we are going to ask every guest of the show. And the first one is, what does the Pacific Northwest mean to you?
I guess I think about a number of things. It is friendly people, beautiful spaces, and kind of a hidden gem. Because I grew up east of the Mississippi, Chicago and Cleveland, and for people out there who haven't really spent time in the West, let alone the Pacific Northwest, they don't know how spectacular this place is. Between the benefits of an urban area like Seattle and the rural mountains, and then you've got almost every climate in Washington State. I think 7 of the 8 possible climates in the world or something. And people are nice here. It does take a while to get to know people, having moved here from out of state myself. But I think that might be the same in more places than not. So it's our home, and we plan to stay here even when Mike is ready to throw me out of Northwest MLS. So.
Okay, last signature question. And this is one you're going to have to think carefully of because it could damage your resume and your reputation. If you could only listen to one song for the rest of your life, what would that be?
Okay, this is a terrible question. First of all, it sounds like you're setting me up to be harassed in a terrorist camp. Sounds glaring at me.
It's something I will use against you at some future date.
So, Mike, you probably remember I was in a band in college. It actually paid for my senior year in college. It was sort of country rock, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. We would get requests at 1 a.m. when it was closing time in the bar to play Free Bird. All these crazy things. But I love all kinds of music. A few things that I like particular, the riffs from Pink Floyd and the song Comfortably Numb. They're smooth, they're elegant, so it's not like radical. I would say Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin was like a hero in terms of guitar music.
Yeah, for sure.
In terms of class, and there's other music forms I like. I mean, I like the crooners like Frank Sinatra. You can't go wrong with a martini and a Frank Sinatra song. But then if I had to pick one song that I had to listen to over and over and over and over, like I'm stranded on a desert island and the only thing that's happening is music, it would be something classical, and it's probably something simple like Ravel's Bolero or something, where it's a lilting kind of a paced song. It builds up to a certain crescendo. It's also long, so it isn't that repetitive. Then it starts over, just like watching waves on a beach. So I don't know. I'd love to hear what the answers are for some of your other people when you say that.
Well, it's a hard question because all of a sudden it leads you to, that would drive me insane eventually.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, well, can't thank you enough for being here today. You are awesome. Learned a lot more about you, and hopefully we'll get maybe some fall time on the golf course. We kind of threatened each other.
I'll wear a mask and hit them along.
All right. Good to have you on board. Thanks a million.
Hey, Michael and Sophia, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Well, that takes us to our next segment, which is Mike Check, where Mike will be giving us a piece of advice on anything business, real estate, or life related. So what kind of advice do you have for us today, Mike?
Well, the advice of the day is the importance of the telephone. And we, in our communication, certainly in our industry, I'm sure others as well, there is a lot of exchange of information and negotiation on emails and texts. And the telephone is something that avoids a lot of confusion potentially, maybe miscommunicating some emotion that somebody is picking up in an email. But I think if the telephone followed email, people would stop and go, you mean instead of just writing this doggone thing out, we can actually pick up the phone and talk to these people? I think it would have been a better evolution of communication. But to avoid miscommunication, misunderstandings, pick up the telephone, call somebody. They want to talk to somebody now anyway, just because they've been home alone for so long.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I've been given the advice that if your email takes up more than like one scroll, then you need to pick up the phone.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, because it can totally get convoluted, and that's great advice. So anyone listening, pick up the phone today, call someone, whether it's business related or someone in your life, go ahead and pick up the phone and give someone a call.
Yep.
I definitely will be doing that. Okay, so then our last segment of the podcast is something that is new. We announced it last time. It's called Open Mic. So how it works is our listeners submit questions on our YouTube channel, and you can also submit questions on our various social media platforms by messaging us. And then Mike will answer those questions on the following podcast. So we got a few questions for you today, Mike, from some of our listeners.
Okay.
And our first question is, what is the minimum requirement to become a real estate agent?
Okay. Well, I'll preface it with not enough requirements. So it is 18 years old, high school diploma, and 90 hours of education. What I would add on to that is the responsibilities real estate brokers have with their clients is significant. And the education component, I think a college degree might make sense in a conversation. And I think additional training, additional education to get your license in real estate study is something that would improve our industry a great deal.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so then our next question is, do you have a favorite restaurant in Kirkland that you always go to?
Okay, that's really hard because summer is different than winter. But I would say I love a little Thai restaurant in the winter. Hunaman Thai Cafe in downtown Kirkland. It's just awesome. It's warm. It's raining outside. You've got hot pad Thai. It's really good. In the summer, it goes from the French Bistro down in Caroline Point up to the Slip, which is just a hamburger joint right in downtown Kirkland. So that's summertime.
Yum. If any of you listening have any questions for Mike, please submit them and he will answer your questions next time. They can be anything business, entrepreneurship, real estate, life. So let's have fun with it.
Yeah, let's do.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up episode 2. Thank you so much, Mike, for helping moderate this podcast today, hosting it for us.
I'm doing it together with you.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And of course, thanks to Tom for being a part of the podcast today and giving us some insight on what exactly he does and who he is. That was a lot of fun getting to know him.
Yes, it was.
And thank you to all our listeners. You can tune in every first Wednesday of the month for a new episode of Pacific Northwest Mike Check.
Yes, you can. And Sophia, our next guest will be Mr. Nathan Gorton. Nathan is the Government Affairs Director for the Washington Association of Realtors. Leads all of our industry's interests in legislative activity in the state, as well as access to the governor's office. So he'll be a great guest to have on board next episode.
Wow, can't wait.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys next month. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to Pacific Northwest Mike Check. Tune in every first Wednesday of the month to learn something new about real estate, business, and life.